Um, cool. So thanks for playing around and doing this with me. It's just a fun thing that I've been doing lately. Is I've been having like these one-on-one catch-ups. Often with friends who haven't seen in a while, and sort of just catch up on life and what are we thinking about and what are we excited about. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I saw when you put the call out. And I was helping my daughter with her homework, whatever. And I think Amy Jo Kim responded that you did it with her, but I was like, oh, that sounds fun. And so thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so as I was just thinking about sort of the context of how we've known each other, and then the last time we hung out in person. And I wonder I don't know if my memory is right on this. I've been thinking about it, so you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but if I recall correctly, we first met probably like 2008, I want to say. And I think we had lunch at the Woodside Bakery.
Did we meet one-on-one for the first time? Is that what we did? It wasn't at Trinity, and it wasn't at like a startup to startup. It was before that through.
Oh. Yeah. It could have been those, like when McClure used to host the sessions at the the Hyatt in Palo Alto or whatever.
Yeah, we did. I think Sheridan.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and you were one of the organizers of that.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right. So it could have been that instead. I'm thinking of like I remember Tony Hsieh was one of the guests. James Hong was one of the guests.
That's right.
I remember I got placed at a table with a couple of guys who were working on a website called airbedandbreakfast.com. And I said, cool.
Terrible idea. It was just like, are you kidding me? Someone's going to sleep on a mattress in your... So you can like be watching them while they sleep? This is never going to work.
It's funny. You guys caught some early interesting people around there.
Yeah, the history of the Startup to Startup was I had run a group. I hadn't founded the group, but I had run a group called Round Zero in the late 90s. And it had been founded by a number of folks. And then I kind of came in and took it on. But like Naval, Nirav, Nay, and a bunch of these guys had started it. And they had started it as just like 5 guys getting together to have dinner. And then they're like, oh, why don't you invite friends the next time? And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then a few of them went off to found Opinions. And so they're like, oh, we need someone to take over. And I just moved to the area. And my brother was one of the founders of Opinions as well. So I kind of connected with them, and I love running events. So I took it on with a couple of the guys who didn't join the startup. And that's where, James Hong was a member, and Larry and Sergey would come, but no one kind of knew who they were. And, all these people. Dave McClure was there, but he had just been trying to sell his last company. No one knew who he was. We had all these people, and we all basically, we were all doing the same thing. We were trying to start companies and find our way. And
and that was, when was Round Zero? What year?
That was like 97, 96, 97, 98, 99, like in that time period. And we ran it all the way to like around 2001, and then it just became too hard. Actually, we handed it over to who else was working on it? Josh Becker, who's now running for office, and he also took on Startup to Startup as well with us after that too, with James Jam. But it was in that late 90s period.
And were you already here? Did you go to school here and then you kind of stuck around?
I went to MIT, and then in 96, I tried starting an instant messaging company, but we didn't call it instant messaging. That term didn't exist. We called it real-time messaging. And
this was like in the era when like ICQ was around. They hadn't come out. But it was kind of that era of like...
That's what makes it particularly painful, because we built it, and I made all kinds of mistakes. Like I can walk through, like, my number one mistake of every startup is overthinking things and trying to like anticipate too many steps ahead, which I did there. And I've almost never said that your technical architecture can be the difference between success or failure, because it almost never is. It was that time. Because I had the hypothesis that people were paying by the minute for internet at home, and so we needed to have this work at at offices where you'd be on for 8 hours a day so you could message with each other.
Mhm.
Well, offices had firewalls, but back then homes didn't have firewalls. So
Mhm.
we had to route every message through a Win16 box, and we get to like 200 users and crash.
Mhm.
ICQ was like, here's your IP, talk. And they could get to 1 million users because all their box was doing was a lookup table of IP addresses. So
Mhm.
they went Zoom, and we were like, we just flattened and died, and they just blew past us. And
Right.
I mean, they came
So
out after us.
all of their client architecture was all basically peer to peer, like look up in the directory at
It
the
was
server and
literally,
then
here's your software,
direct
here's your
connections.
software, make an open direct port connection to this IP address.
Mhm.
Which today you can never build that because everyone's behind firewalls, but that was
Mhm.
the architecture. And so by doing it that way, they literally, all they had to do was build a database table lookup and
Right.
software.
Right. To kind of let it scale very
And
simply.
it's the only time, one of the only times I think I've ever seen, maybe search engines, your algorithm for search engines is the other time,
Right.
but like the tech choice you made was so impactful.
Right. It's great. I'm glad that I have another one in the library now because I feel like it's frequent that somebody I think I always make the argument that you start something by either like a product or sales, if you want to call it like insight, is kind of the way that everything starts. And actually, it's hard to even point to examples where the technology was part of the kind of
Yeah.
initial success. I think technology like defends success that is otherwise, emerges because of, behavior change or, some other, some sales channel that you're able to sort of really own and dominate. But yeah, this is another one, I guess, where technology, I guess I was using the example of Google. And then I think Google plus, what was the service called?
What was the what?
What was the messaging service that you were building
Oh,
called?
well, no one knows it. We called it Screenfire.
Screenfire. Okay.
Yeah, we were so excited. Like, you can fire your boss at work. It's okay. We had all these ideas, and I had a little fire button you'd push. And I mean, honestly, it wasn't all that much of a invention because there was Z writing, and there was people who were messaging each other prior to this. And it
And
was really
AOL
just
Instant Messenger was
like,
out, but only available to
no,
AOL.
well,
No.
well, AOL did have an on via only their service. They had a messenger.
Right.
And MIT for 10 plus years had a messenger, and every student used it. And so I was like, gosh, this is weird. Like, I'm graduating, I don't have a job, I want to do a startup. And I'm like, gosh, 100% of MIT students use this. Why don't we make this work on the internet?
Right.
So it wasn't like
Right.
totally
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
invented. But obviously it's different architecture when you do the internet versus proprietary internal network. But
And back then
yeah.
there were what, like millions, like single digit millions of users on the internet, or maybe not even.
Yeah, there must have been because I mean ICQ got to 1 million at least accounts in less than 6 months. So
Okay.
it was also so we there was probably 8 of us who came out all at the same time. And it's funny because this is also the first time I interacted with Walt Mossberg because he wrote an article about messengers. He was at the Wall Street Journal at the time, and we didn't get covered, but no one really knew who we were. We didn't have much. I was on like CNET and Two Cows, and that's like the only place you could find us.
Right.
And I wrote him afterwards, going, "It was a great piece you wrote. I was actually very impressed that this person at this publication knew tech well enough." And I was like, "Hey, if you ever do a follow-up piece or anything else, I just want you to know about us." And he wrote back and he said, "For sure, no problem. Thanks for writing." And I was like, "Wow, this guy's a really nice guy."
Wow.
Later, I met him through these conferences and stuff. And I'm like, "Yeah, he was cool." And in fact, we ended up when we did Bix, which was a company we did in was it 2006. We did get him to cover us, and we had a nice piece covered there. And I gotta say, man, I've only ever twice had due diligence that I really thought was just world class. And once was with KKR when we were selling Clover to them, and the other was Walt Mossberg writing about Bix. Holy cow!
In the diligence that he did to do the
Researching,
story.
using the product, trying everything, interacting with everyone, just tremendously deep, getting into the weeds, really understanding it.
Right. And Bix, for people who maybe haven't seen it, I know I had played with it, and I think it was a lot of like these contests, right? Like so, a singing contest, or maybe did you have any kind of like video component to it, or was it?
Yeah, we The hypothesis behind it was it's unfair if you're talented, what you have to go through at, in New York and
Hmm.
LA to become famous. You should be able to sort of go jump right to fame if you're good.
Right.
It was inspired by American Idol.
Hmm.
We just felt like the scalability of American Idol was like you could kind of only really have one or two winners there. Could we create a platform that allowed for hundreds of winners in different
Right.
categories? And so we built it as a generic contest platform. Anyone could create one, enter it, and vote on it. But then we built all these different modules. So one was a video singing one that had all the licenses for the music and the
Hmm.
lyrics and everything, and merged the audio in. And actually we had one of the guys that was on our team, John Hayes. It was just brilliant guy from, I think he'd been at there.com, but he went off and started Pure Storage and built all the technology behind that.
Hmm.
And so we had some really great tech. And now he's doing a company called Ghost, which is like self-driving car.
Right.
And brilliant at it. And what's crazy is that like to figure out how to use these sound cards and merge audio and do all that is like really hard to do.
Yeah.
So we built all that technology out, but the reality was, we had the Walt Mossberg article, which was great, but within 8 months of, founding and funding it, we got acquired by Yahoo. So
Hmm.
that story kind of played out differently, not,
Right.
not, not complaining at all.
Do you think that the insights around the beginning of Bix, do you think that they are sort of captured and owned today within YouTube itself, or maybe does TikTok represent some of these ideas in the modern day, or like is it still kind of open?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, none of us who did the sort of karaoke tool, because there was a couple of others too. There was one that got bought by EA and I think Sing Shot or something, and a couple
Right.
others. Um, None of them really, I think, took off. I think back then, um, there. It's interesting. Like the people who used our platforms weren't like the high schoolers and the college students. It was actually people. Our average age users were more like in their 40s and 50s. They were like
Hmm.
they loved singing, they loved doing these things, whereas the students, we actually we had trouble engaging. Now when I look at something like TikTok, which my daughter's a huge user of, um, it does feel similar in the sense it's a form of expression and it's nice and short. It also has a lot of remixing to it, which makes it much easier to generate the content.
Hmm.
um, and so yeah, I think it does maybe capture some of the ideas of discovery, um, but there's something different about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. There's something different, but something's changed where I think maybe that group cares now a lot more about, like, it is their place to hang out, whereas back then it felt more like they go online but they're not really hanging out online. Back then it was, Facebook was, I remember we were doing usability and Facebook had just, the week we were doing usability, Facebook had just launched newsfeed and everyone was freaked out like it was going to destroy Facebook.
Right.
You should go to the profile pages, you shouldn't go to this newsfeed. and
Right.
and so people were just getting onto social media more seriously then, but at the time they were still mostly hanging out offline.
Hmm.
I think now that everyone's moved to basically everyone hangs out online, I think that's actually the secret sauce of what makes the TikToks of the world. Like it's the same elements of creativity and but I think it's people establish their social um, personal score of socialization and where they stand
Right.
by their performance online now versus
Right.
before they weren't.
And it's not structured, I guess, online in a formalized contest. It's more just,
Yeah,
your
exactly. It's
number
just
of likes or number of
right.
upvotes or
How
whatever.
many people are
Yeah.
liking you? How much people are watching you? Right. They didn't need a win or lose. They just
Right.
want, um, like in any social circle in real life, they feel like in whatever bubble they are in, that they're at the top of that bubble. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be scored.
Right.
And-
It kind of reminds me too of, I'm sure you've seen the tweets between Kanye and Katie Stanton.
No, I haven't seen.
Oh, yeah.
No. I don't
Like,
follow Kanye. I do follow Katie.
so I was probably 2 weeks ago or something.
Okay.
Like out of the blue, Kanye West calls up Katie Stanton and he says something like, "Hey, you're on the board of Viacom. I want to talk to you about this idea." and it's all secondhand or stuff that I've seen off Twitter. But I guess the gist of it is he wants to start Y Combinator for musicians. So to effectively help create, I mean, I guess Y Combinator probably is a form of Bix for startup founders, if you want to
Yep.
create some analogy. It's like a stage, and there's
Yep.
a form of voting, and there's outcomes and stuff. So yeah, he's gonna do Bix again. He's kind of Bix reinvented.
Well, I don't, if you get down to like, the goal was to allow you to become discovered without having to go work as a waiter somewhere or kiss someone's butt to get a job, to move up the ladder. I think these platforms are enabling it. It's just, it's still, it feels like you're wandering the wilderness though a little bit. You know that there are some pots of gold out there, but you don't know where, and there's no paths. And so you're just kind of fumbling around. And I think that's probably the big difference. Is before there were paths, they weren't great paths. There was a lot of crap that you had to go through and hoops to jump through, but you could see the path.
Whereas now you kind of just have to put stuff out there and see if it gets picked up. Like, I think Justin Bieber was discovered on YouTube, but like he wasn't trying to be discovered.
Right. Exactly.
Accidental or
accidental discoveries. Yeah. And you have to do enough. You have to put enough out there to get discovered. So it's not completely accidental, because you have to have enough swings at the bat. But it's really unclear. Like, you can't just buy ads. You can't. Right. It's not clear. So. I've been doing some writing recently, fiction writing.
Oh, cool. What kind of fiction writing?
Mostly science fiction writing. And so I wrote a book. I wanted to write about AI and like what it would actually take to create AI. So I wrote this book short, like 40,000 words, and then started sending it off to editors and so forth. I'm like, oh, this is painful. And so I'm still kind of doing it, although I'm experimenting with an idea of maybe making it into a YouTube video. I'm like, maybe I could get more discovered if I turned it into like a sort of animated graphic novel. So I'm just experimenting with that just to see like maybe the discovery mechanism you do different. And then I started writing short stories. And then I've started like learning that different publications have very kind of like, there's almost like it feels like pitch decks. Like, certain VCs expect certain things in your pitch deck and certain stuff, certain approaches. And if you don't do that part, you kind of almost get filtered out right at the beginning, regardless of your story. Right. And so I'm like, oh, so what I really need is I need a story that's about 5,000 words long, that's this and that. And I'm kind of having to like write those.
Are you involved with any kind of collaborative groups around your writing, or do you do it more solo?
I've just been doing it solo. Yeah.
Do you know James Yu?
No, I don't know.
James, he was one of the co-founders of Parse, so you might have heard of him kind of from the tech ecosystem there. And he was at Facebook for years, but he left, probably, I don't know, 3-5 years ago or something, and he's kind of taken up full-time science fiction writing as kind of hobby / job almost. But he's become a little bit of a hub for other people in tech who are into writing short story science fiction stuff. So he might be interesting to connect with in some context. He runs a kind of I guess you'd call it like a series of events called the Short Story Club. So shortstory.club. And they invite an author, and like I went to a few where they had like Cory Doctorow and Ted Chiang, really, masters of the craft. And they come in and bring them in, and we all read a short story together. And then they have like a Zoom where we get to ask questions and chat with them.
That's a cool idea. Yeah, I've definitely found it to be a very intriguing process. Like, I've been going and finding all these, these magazines that are like these science fiction magazines and so forth, and then submitting stuff and getting rejected. Although I finally, like earlier this week, someone wrote back from this 50-year-old publication going, your story is a little long for what we normally like, but I love the story. She went kind of crazy about it. She's like, can I buy it? And I'm like, yes. I don't know anything about this. Great. Fantastic. So I'll let you know how that goes. But it's interesting. One of the I wish I had known about that group earlier, because when I wrote the first book, I didn't really know anything about writing per se. I didn't think about it as a craft.
Right.
And then James Cham actually had made a recommendation about a book that was not specifically, it wasn't recommending writing, but it was a writing book. And then I was kind of looking at that one, and then I saw this other one on on the Amazon page called Creating Character Arcs. And normally I don't do well with these kinds of books. Like I'm not good with self-help type books. But I start going through this and I'm like, holy cow, this is really good. And the way she does it is she takes like movies, and she's like, okay, first there's the lie, and like she's like, in Thor this was the lie, and what about Bob, this is the lie, in Toy Story this is the lie, and then here's the ghost, and here's the true thing they're after, and she kind of takes you through it. And so then I took her stuff and I like put it on a spreadsheet, all the sections, and I put Thor as my just my sample example. And then now when I write my stories, I kind of start with this as the bones. And then there's this concept of writing from the middle out. So like I actually start from the midpoint where they're going to have to kind of, and it's totally transformed my writing.
Oh, wow.
It's really hard to describe, but it is like giving it bones. Like it gives it, like I had the meat before and I liked the meat, but it was just, like a squid. It was just flopping around. And this gives you the bones. And I don't know if it's the right way to go, but it definitely, like now I'm kind of cranking things out with this framework. And I don't always write the whole story. Sometimes I just like draft it out. And then if I'm more inspired, I'll go actually then crank the story out. But in like 1 weekend, I cranked out a 5,000 word story with that. And so it just helps me move.
Right. And do you have do you imagine that this is kind of a hobby that you want to perfect and become like a craft, and are you going to spend 10 years on this, or just kind of like see what happens and see how long it grabs you and where your interest lies?
Yeah, I think I've never really had a hobby before. Work's always my hobby. Like when I have a hobby, it's like start another company on the side.
Right.
So I think it's good to have a hobby. I remember when I had, I started a company, in 99, 2000, and then, the market fell out underneath, and I kind of had put all my psyche into it. And I kind of collapsed after that. And I realized I didn't have, it was like a chair without enough, legs to it. And so then I started trying to come up with hobbies. Like I'm going to learn how to fence, and I'd go to Stanford every night, week to fence, and I'm going to learn how to sail. I'm going to learn how to do all these things. And writing was one of the things I had started doing back then. Back then I was really into Alexander the Great. So I was writing stuff related to that. And then as the kids are getting old enough that I don't have to be around them all the time, I'm like, hey, maybe I actually have a little time for writing. And it's really a balance thing. It's not that I necessarily want to be an author, but it's like, it gives me, I have to be productive at all times. I have to be doing something.
Right. Yeah.
And so I have to have some asset I can show for my work. And and writing in some ways is easier because worst case scenario, I stick it up on the shelf and I can point to it and go, I wrote that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the reason I do it. I'm sure there's ideas I think that are interesting to share out there. Like the reason I did the AI book was like, I'd love to actually read a book about how an AI actually would be created with the mentality of like the algorithms and how it would happen. And I just didn't see a book out there that filled that niche for me. But a lot of the other stories I'm writing are just like, I picked up a story on like, I was reading a book on public busing in the 80s, and it was written in the 80s for 60s and 70s in Boston, and the themes were really interesting to me. I'm like, let's put this in science fiction, right? And so I converted it over to that, and so there's things like that where I just let me do this for the weekend, and I just write it.
Right. So is this kind of your primary creative outlet these days?
Yeah, I mean, I've never really had another. Like I said, other than like I like to start companies and build stuff, I have no other creative outlet.
Right. And where are you? I think last we chatted about companies. You were working on the food preparation.
I did. I decided. Yeah, I decided. So last year, we sat down, we looked at this, and we said that all the customers we were trying to essentially sell to. Initially, we were out after this sort of the enterprise client of who you sell cooking devices to. So this is like, Starbucks and KFC and
Yeah.
McDonald's and all the, the enterprise versions of these of the world. And it became really clear to me that like when you sell enterprise software to a company, you sell to the CIO, CTO, they have a process. They assume they're going to be buying this technology, implementing it. When you sell this technology to these big companies that are doing this stuff, they don't have the same process. They don't have the same concept there. So the guy who might buy equipment, he's got two things he looks at. Will it break down? Is it cheaper than what I already have? That's it. So when you go in and say, hey, I have a new way of cooking, you could basically launch stores the way Starbucks does, have a super profitable small footprint store. Well, who in the company would think about those things? You can't line up the cook and the ops person and the CEO of these companies are all former CFOs. There's no founders left in any of these companies.
I
so
see.
They're about managing finances and dealing with franchisees.
Right.
And so I kind of realized, even though there was huge interest at the beginning to kind of that pulled us in, because no one ever builds new technology for this industry.
Right.
It was almost a false sort of signal, because they didn't have the organizational structure to make big, tough changes. I'd say, with the exception of maybe Starbucks is actually the most, like, by far the most innovative and interesting. They have some amazing people there. But when you're building a startup, you can't say, I'm going to bet only on one company.
Did you think about using the technology that you built to build a new brand, or is that too far afield from what you
once
were after?
we got to that, we tried a few other things out, using the technology, but we didn't want to go all, like, we started messing around with the food side and things like that. And we said, look, we can't do all that stuff. So either we partner on that, or we don't exist. And what it came down to is we said, you know what, this is great technology. And so we set up a separate entity. We put all the technology and IP into it. We said, you know what, sooner or later, this is going to, like, its time will be. You can't force markets to happen. We were just starting to feel like the Palm Pilot and
so just a little early
waiting for the iPhone world to happen, right? And not even Palm Pilot, like the Newton. We were feeling like the Newton. And so our take was, let's keep all that together, but we don't need people just cranking. We don't need to be having a team of people cranking away. So we still have this entity that has all of that. I'm ready to pull the trigger, but I need to see enough signals that there's more going on in the market. So
was that a pretty easy conclusion to come to, given everything that was laid out, or was it kind of a painful, struggle?
It's never easy, because it always feels like you're quitting, and that's never, like, we're a world of people here who don't like to quit. Like, that's why we're here. So it's never easy. That said, I felt like we did a very thorough and exhaustive attempt at both testing different markets and pushing as hard as we could in those markets. So I don't feel like we did any disservice. We had actually a lot of cash left in the bank. So it was not something where we're like, we felt pressure. We were like, we got this 2 more years, but does it matter? Like, if there's the one thing you kind of learn after doing startups is you can take a bad product and make it better in a good market, but you can't make a good market happen. You can't accelerate the market side. So and it's very hard to pivot. Like with Clover, we massively pivoted the company, but we really were just like a core team of software folks that could kind of build whatever app we needed to. Here, it's a very specialized team building hardware and computer vision. And so it wasn't like a team that just goes, oh, let's build a dating app tomorrow. So if you're going to do that, you might as well just form a new company with people who are interested in doing that. Never fun to do that. I hate losing. And even though there'll still be opportunity in the future, it's still not the outcome any of us want.
It sounds like that one's kind of on ice right now, waiting for the market, maybe someday, and it could be years from now. There's no operating thing that needs to
it's got its own capital. Like it's still capitalized and it can operate for however long it needs to, and then it's like sleeping and it can activate when it needs to and be ready to go. And I think there will be a time where it will activate and be ready to go, but no point in having people cranking away writing more and more code that isn't getting out there.
So do you feel like for you, would you want to kind of sit and wait for that moment and then be ready to jump in, or you'll just pursue whatever you feel like in the meantime, and then
that's kind of that. There's nothing to do on that until times come. So I won't, I will be available to help when the time comes to make it happen, but I won't wait for it. So for me, it's you know, part of it is you got to decide like, what do you love doing? And for me, I love building products. So when I'm working on something, I want to build. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah.
the most fun time is when you find the product market fit and you're still building, right? So
Mhm.
like the moment, like at Clover, we figured the channel out and we were being distributed by, 3,000 banks,
Yeah.
um, was the most fun time of my life, because now, right, we figured out the distribution and now we can just spend time making the best products that get plugged in there. And
Yeah.
Clover's now over 100 billion in processing. It's bigger than Square and bigger than
Wow.
Stripe and bigger than Shopify, and it's still growing faster than a lot of these. And um, super proud of that outcome.
Mhm.
Right? It's
Yeah.
it's awesome. But
That's great.
I'd love to have like 10 more of those.
Mhm. So 10 more, is that serial, or would you do that parallel, or how do you think about
I'd
like
be
what's
I'd be
next for
fine
you?
doing it in parallel. One of the things I've been working on is one of the things that worked really well with Clover was actually that our distribution came from a 40-year-old payment company, right?
Mhm.
So
This is
it
First Data?
First Data, yeah.
Okay.
So First Data had been around for a long time. They were the merchant processor of choice for probably half of businesses in the US. But
Mhm.
what they lacked was, what's the new technology or new thing you're going to offer these businesses? And we were a team of 9 people, right? And we kind of had figured that out. And we
Mhm.
figured it out in a way that was very attractive to them, because we were platform people. So everyone else in the industry was like, I'm a chef and I know how to make a good restaurant point of sale. And we were
Right.
like, we're platform people. Any
Yeah.
type of business that wants to build on it, you can build apps that build on top of that, right? And
Yep. Yeah.
for a company like First Data that was literally in every business out there, that's much more attractive than trying to go, get the best of every point of sale system out there.
Right. Right.
And then we had experiences in big companies and being startups, so we were a really good fit. Um, and they, like I said, KKR, which had bought First Data, they were the ones who were actually doing the due diligence. And again, since Walt Mossberg, that was, I mean,
Mhm.
they literally flew people all over the place. They were, you know, like, it's a bit notorious now, but like one of our customers was the My Pillow people, which you see, the guy Mike, who's kind of interesting guy. But like they were using our point of sale because they would sell them at all the fairs and all these different places
Mhm.
and stuff. And so literally, like, KKR is flying their team all over the place to do due diligence. Are you using their product? How good is it? Digging
Mhm.
in. And like, I'm sweating like crazy. Like, I
Mhm.
hope people say they're good. It's good.
Right.
Uh, but that thoroughness gave them the confidence to move forward, and pushed us as the only solution then from that point forward. So
Yeah.
it was good.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
So are you you talk about sort of wanting to build, do you feel like you'll get back to it someday, or are you kind
Well,
of on a pause or hiatus for now, or?
so what I've, so yeah, sorry, that was where I was going with the story. So, one of the things I think is interesting is that when you compare a large company that actually has an asset or distribution, with a startup like this, it's extra powerful, because as we do startups, like we probably spend more than 50% of the time trying to get customers, not even on the tech. It's like, how do I
Mhm.
now get people to use my product? And these big companies, I think, have now really started to finally come around in a way much more so than previously, to say, I need to have a tech business, I need tech revenue. And that's great. And I think, kudos to Airbnb and Uber and these others that have basically gone into not traditional tech industries, and kind of obliterated those businesses with new tech businesses, right? So
Right.
all the boards of all these companies are now kind of saying, wait, will my company go through that? So I think they finally have the right mentality. So like right now, we haven't announced anything, but I've been working with a large company that is public, and in saying, okay, well, can we provide you with almost like a corporate venture studio? Can I go get people who are ready to do their second startup or third, and maybe the last one they did didn't go well, but they're good startup people, and they're like, what
Mhm.
do I do now? Do I go work at a big company now? Do I have
Mhm.
the energy to go raise money for another idea? Or here's Leonard, and he's offering me a good solid salary, like a really good one,
Mhm.
and a very high chance of an exit of not billions, but let's say a $10 million exit in 18 months, for a team of 5, and distribution through this partner. and the ability to really be in with them. And so the only thing I have to do is I have to pick something in a segment that takes advantage of their secret sauce, whatever it is. So
Is
that's
that vertical focused by the funder of the studio then?
I think that's, again, it's sort of like you want to have an advantage. So your advantage is whatever they do. It doesn't have to even, it can be orthogonal, but you really got to take advantage of them somehow. Otherwise, just
Yeah.
go raise money
Yeah.
from angels. And so my thinking here is that if we build this, then it's kind of that Clover thing. Like, we built Clover, but if we didn't have First Data, I don't think we would have gotten bigger than a lot of these other folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how do I do that for other startups? But I do think it's very hard to go find the startup that fits and then go try to pull them in, because there's a lot of things that don't fit. Here, it's like, no, you're starting it from scratch. Here's $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
Either it works and you get acquired, and if it doesn't work, we'll just pretend the 2 million never happened. Go raise money if you want. Clean cap table. Right. So it's like, because what I'm competing with is I'm trying to recruit, founders that their other option is go raise money, and they probably could. Mm-hmm. And what I'm really trying to say is, hey, I'm going to take all that stress off you in comparison. And if at the end of 18 months it doesn't work out the way you want, you can still be the founder and go raise like you're starting now.
Right. So that's do you then build the products that you would build would be specifically suited for the channel that the funder has, or is that kind of like a key customer one?
I think there's 3 ways you can go about it. One, you can say the company that's funding you is essentially the first customer, and they basically help you really be the anchor customer, and then you can go do others. And then whether or not the company makes sense to bring you in or not, like to acquire you, there's this framework called the Horizon framework, and McKinsey came up with it. I normally don't like consulting frameworks, but I like this one. And it's like Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3. Horizon 1's like your core business. You're an oil and gas company and you make all your money on that, but it's not growing. And then Horizon 2 is like very close to your business, potentially high growth. Maybe you're moving into fracking or something else, and it's kind of still similar to it. And then Horizon 3 is kind of like the crazier new business ideas. Hey, what if we threw data cables through our old pipes? Could we become a telecom company? Right. Mm-hmm. And that's your Horizon 3. And so the way I look at it is these are the Horizon 3 things. Mm-hmm. So they either can take advantage of it as this being the first customer. They can take advantage by going through and figuring out a way to use that customer's distribution, business people, sales, like some collaborative way of using them, or they have an asset that you're using that you're pulling out of it that otherwise would have been trapped inside the company. And so those are the 3 ways I can imagine it working, depending on the business you go after.
Right. And outside of, like, I think Clover is an example of the success case of this with like First Data. Are there other kind of success cases in different industries to point to?
Almost none. The closest is Cisco doing this, right, where they say, we really need this thing. Yeah. Here's the team, here's the funding, and theirs was much more explicit. Theirs is like, here's a 400-page document that says, if you do this, this, and this, we'll buy you for 700 million, right? Right. But I think it's the closest example. It's the spin-in kind of model where it's like, right, you're a startup, but if these things happen, what I'm trying to do is simplify it. If these things happen, I don't want it to be a 400-page document. Right. I want it to be it's a Horizon 3. Mm-hmm. If you do it all outside your company, you don't have to deal with any of the politics of the company. Mm-hmm. Why ideas get killed inside big companies. Right. You don't have to defend the company. Like the executive doesn't have to sit there constantly defending why they exist and why the budget's there and this and that. But if you decide you want to buy it, here's one of the interesting things I've learned about these larger companies is, they're not trading at tech multiples. So, right, to buy a company for $100 million that generates $1 million in revenue is massively dilutive to these companies and very hard for them to swallow. Yeah. And so I think the trade-off you make is you got to be willing as a founder to give up some of that upside to say, I can get acquired for a lot with a small team where you're accelerating my 4 or 5 year journey, right, in 2 years, because I'm taking advantage of your distribution and I want to trade my time and effort for that upside, which is in essence what happens to a lot of companies anyway, right? Like a lot of the acquihires and things like that are essentially that. They're smaller outcomes in order for the big company to accelerate whatever you're trying to do.
Right. And is there a a pitch to would-be founders for how it can, like, do you have right of first refusal with the funder, or can you actually go off on your own without
Yeah. So this is the
restriction?
interesting part. After talking to a number of founders, I was trying to figure out what would cause you to say I want to do this instead of
Yeah.
these other things. And so one was you need to make enough of a salary. So like, if you're in Silicon Valley, it's got to be like a 200K salary, which a lot of times you don't necessarily want as an angel, funding a company to be paying that
Mhm.
to people. The second was you want some concrete exit. So it's like, if it makes sense, they'll buy you for $10 million in 18 months. So you kind of have a mental model. Okay, 5 people, $10 million, 18 months, thumbs up, right? That feels
Mhm.
good. And just getting to that number. And if it was a hardware company, it would need to be different than software. Certain amount of funding, like we're committed to 2 million. You're going to get 2 million in funding. You run the way you want. At 18 months, we decide. If we decide not to, we get nothing.
Mhm.
Zero.
They don't
Now,
have
now,
equity in the entity.
not even equity.
Okay.
Now, here's why I think it's up to the company and the founder to decide on this stuff. But here's why I didn't want it to be just an automatic conversion. Anytime you have a large organization that has to make decisions, they'll oftentimes take the safest way out. And the safest way out would just be, well, let's just let it roll. If it goes
Yeah.
well, we'll still make the money. I want them to be a little more in on it, right?
They have
So
to
it's
make a
like,
decision and
I
be
want
in
you to work
or
really hard for 18 months together
right.
and see if there's a there. If there is, promote it to a Horizon 2 company
Mhm.
and fully staff it and fund it and bring it in house and invest in that as a business. You're not buying the company. You're saying I'm going to invest in a business,
Right.
and this jump started you to it. And if you decide not to, let them go. If they're going to go raise another round, they can raise it with clean cap table, which makes them super. They've just spent. It's like having an ARPA grant, right? It's like
Mhm.
I did a whole
Yeah.
bunch of research and work. I got my team together, and
Yeah.
now when I go to you as a VC, it's pretty exciting to get all that packaged up, and now you're getting seed money. Now that said, I'm fine with the teams figuring out, well, we're still driving you customers, or we're still doing this or that, or like let's come together. So I
Mhm.
don't have a problem with that, but I really want the founder to feel like there's no reason not to do this versus
Right.
go. Like I just don't want them to compete with that. And my take is for a company, like if you're a really big company, do you really want to be piddling around with this stuff, or do you just like you're trying to build $100 million businesses? So just
Right.
do it, build it, or let it go.
Right. And do you think that I guess the would-be entrepreneur for this, are these people that are already in your network? Or are you going to kind of hang a shingle and kind of build a new
Yeah.
network of people who would be interested in this kind of thing?
Part of it's a timing thing. So I certainly would use my network where I can, but a part of it's timing. So if I could get this going and do it with enough startups, I basically would kind of go to all the people I know in the investor world and say, sooner or later, you're going to have an amazing founder that just it didn't work out for. And that founder is
Mhm.
going to have to make a choice. Do I go take the job as a product manager at Google and have my cushy job for a while? Or do I go start another company, which I just got done with, and put myself out there? I think this is a really interesting hybrid option, which
It's like
is
startup rehab.
still your own boss. You don't have all that hanging on your shoulders to be the founder again, and you're still motivated and excited. So I think this is a really amazing opportunity for someone in between. And I think there's a lot of investors out there who have a lot of really amazingly talented people who just you can't all win. So what happens to you? And I hate seeing people go off and take in the retirement package at the big company because they're amazingly talented and you still want them creating new
Right.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be my ideal situation, is that this becomes a new highly valid path for somebody whose startup doesn't quite go the way they expected. Good. It could be a good outcome or a bad outcome, but just like getting them back out.
Right. And do you have like, it sounds like, are you somewhere between exploring this, or like, are you
Yeah.
stake in the ground
I
committed
have
to this, or?
I have a company right now. Again, I kind of want to wait
Yeah.
until things are more official, but I have a company right now that pretty far along with on that sort of that's why I have so much detail to the structure
Yeah. Yeah.
is that they're really good partners on this. They're very invested in building technology businesses, and they're very thoughtful about it, and they understand the sort of ecosystem of what it's like to be, founder and what you get,
Mhm.
the pros and cons with it, right? So I think it stands a good chance of happening, but I never know till it happens. So
Right.
we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. And
Just like I submitted this story and they said they loved it and it should be in a publication towards the end of the month, but we'll see when we see. So.
yeah. Don't count your chickens until they're there. Right?
Yeah, yeah, it's been
Cool.
fun.
Yeah. And do you think I know because you say you're talking about building and your passion for building, is this structure the thing that you imagine fulfills that kind of that itch, or do you plan to be very hands-on with each of the teams in kind of a product or kind of building perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you've been through this, having done startups before. There's an initial phase where you build out the, like we were kind of talking about with the story, like the bones of it and the bones of the
Mhm.
product and elements, and then you move into this mode of improvements and customer development and so forth. And that's an equally important part of it. I think I can help people accelerate that first part, and I can do that with more than one idea, right?
Mhm.
And what that founder really needs to take on of the company needs to say, I'm going to build that business up.
Mhm.
And because I still feel like the majority of startup work is really in the end building the business. It's like 90% building the business and customers and 10% building the product,
Right.
especially now compared to, like, maybe I wouldn't have made that argument 20 years ago when I had to buy like Sun servers and
Right.
figure out how to build app servers and all that. But now literally you can turn, at least in the software world, you can turn things on
Yep.
so fast with one developer. You can build almost kind of anything now.
Yep.
So I really think it's all about finding the people who are going to be successful at building the customer relationships and channel
Right.
and use of the product. And then I feel good about, you know, filling that role of being very efficient at building products quickly and cost effectively and high quality.
Mhm.
So
In that 10% of work, you'd be hands-on with that 10% of work.
I'd love to do that. Like
Mhm.
that would be great. I would love to be in that role.
And so the people who would be kind of, I guess you're doing the studio, the people who would be the founders would
Right.
be responsible for like customer development and kind of
Building the
pushing it
business.
through the market.
Yeah. So I think I'm leaning towards more finding founders that are a little bit more of the extrovert,
Hmm.
business customer side versus the pure play technology uh,
Hmm.
founders. That said, I'm okay with both. I think I've met some people on the technology co-founder side that were better business people than the business people, right? So it's like
Hmm.
it's really just who's going to be passionate about that as a business and doing whatever it takes to make that business succeed.
Right.
Where I kind of look at the studio as like, is there a shared resource where you know sometimes we hire an engineering team and then we're done with the first product and then we're like, we got to keep these guys busy. What are they
Hmm.
going to do while they wait for the business to grow? So I think
Hmm.
there's just a lot of things where like the studio should take that role on, unless the technology is so core and hard to build. If you're doing something with physics, it's like, well, I kind of
Right.
have to have that team there year round. But
Hmm.
for a lot of things, I feel like we almost run out of product work for the team to do. And it's like, I want a really high quality team, but I kind of want them working on the core part. And then you're hiring engineers that slowly grow it out, which is a different mentality and
Right.
personality. So that would be the ideal way of doing it. It's very, very quick, uh,
Hmm.
responsive way. But it depends on the founder too, right? You meet a founder and they're like, this is how I want to do it. And they're like, then do it that way. Right. I've got a great co-founder who's technical, who can write all the, fine, do it.
Right. Hmm. And is
Right.
this all homed in Palo Alto, or kind of how
That's
do
the
you
other
think
thing.
about geographies and stuff these days?
That's the other thing that quite honestly you convinced me of, was that I honestly think that it can be virtual. Like I started using TopTal after talking with you, right? And gosh, I've had amazingly great experiences with that service.
Hmm.
And I've come to the conclusion that you can, in a way, it's almost better for me not to be in an office with other people sometimes because I get so edgy that I want to see work going on, and you can't always see work going on, and
Right.
you're almost more disruptive by being around people. So like when I work on a project now, it's like I do 8 a.m. calls, the person
Hmm.
can be wherever,
Yeah.
and they've had a full day, and so we just kind of talk about things and where we're blocked, and
Yeah.
I'm less annoying to them, and
Mhm.
they get more
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sold on that. I do love interacting with people. I do miss
Mhm.
that. But I don't know if it's actually more efficient for building.
Right.
I don't know
Yeah.
how you feel about it. I mean, we talked about it a while back, but
Yeah.
you seem pretty comfortable with that model
Yeah, I
too.
mean, I think it's different, and I think a lot of people think that it's, anything from bizarre. I've heard it called. I've heard it called like not ambitious enough. So I think there's a lot of uh, you know negative perception around the style. But I think back to some of the times when I've worked, kind of elbow to elbow with a team in San Francisco in an office. And I remember this one period, probably, you know, probably half a dozen or more of us around. And I think, my natural kind of style is, okay, like what's going on, what's broken, what are we gonna do next, how do we fix that? And kind of like I talk it out. And I remember, one group I was working with, they said, hey, can we just like do Tuesdays work from home? And then, if you have a question for us, you can like write us on Slack or something. But like just, if we have headphones on, that means like don't tap us on the shoulder and don't interrupt, which is like totally valid. But I think sometimes maybe this also reflects some of what you're saying is, if you don't have like if you don't just like accept, have some patience for, it's like an impatience for the progress, but a patience for the process. In that, like, you have to, it just takes a lot of time to build a great product, and it takes a certain amount of like investment and polish and focus. And I think if you're sort of like always injecting like a tornado into that, that's not productive. It's actually better to just be comfortable saying like, today I'm going to do other stuff that's not going to be in the core of, stirring the pot of the product. Like, there's customers I'm going to talk to, or other experiments I can do that don't impact the team and don't disrupt the core team building. And I found that to be kind of, I would say I sort of figured that out in person as, a productive way for me to work in person. And so I think when we work now, on Highlighter, we're, about a dozen people all over the world. And there we don't have any of that problem. Like, we only talk kind of when we have, like there's a blocker, there's an issue. I mean, actually, I'll footnote that though. We have started one process which has been really productive, called Open Office, and not the open source Office products, but
Right.
just happens to be what we call our Slack channel. And it's just like a place where if you're out, you can sort of post the Zoom link, and it's just a place to hang out. There's no particular agenda. You don't have to show up. It's like, kind of like the lobby of the office, and you bump into people and you say hi and chat about the weekend. And if you've got questions, you can come. So it almost functions as a little bit like an office hours too.
Yep. Yep.
So I think there are a lot of like new habits like that can, and when we try to do the stuff over like GitHub comments and issues, and it's so slow, and people sometimes misunderstand the tone and think that people don't have their back in the same way that it's super obvious when we discuss it over Zoom that everybody's on the same team and we're all kind of rowing together and working towards the same goal. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of new stuff that we learned by doing it, but we've been, yeah, fully distributed now for 2+ years,
Mm.
and it's working well, and I think we'll continue to do more of it. So, but it does require different processes. So it's not just recreate everything you would do in Palo Alto or San Francisco, but now digitally, it's there's obviously differences and nuance to it all.
Yeah, it's funny watching, my kids do online school now, and you realize, and I think the same is true with work, you realize that teachers are good at teaching, not at organizing socialization. And
Hmm.
the socialization happens in essence by accident through proximity. The
Right.
kids happen to hang out with each other because they're near each other, but the teacher actually has nothing. It isn't really, school isn't about socialization. It just happens to happen there because you're physically there. And I think the same
Hmm.
thing is with work, right? You're there to get your work done, but you happen to also socialize when you're physically near each other. When you go full virtual, just like with the schools, you lose that serendipity and that ability to
Yeah.
kind of interact. and it's very hard to force that to happen, right? Because it is only happening out of accidental
Yep.
proximity, not through some coercive sort of method. That said, you feel it's missing too. Like you can, we've spent 20, 30, 40 years of our life in some form of that. And
Hmm.
when it's gone, like,
Right.
I'm curious, like, will our kids or our kids maybe will think it's weird to hang out in person together. They'll
Hmm.
be like,
Right.
this is really awkward. I don't have the skills to do this because I'm usually behind a
Right.
video game gun
Hmm.
playing Call of Duty screaming at my friends. So
Right. 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 Yeah.
I'm kind of curious to see if in 30 years from now it'll be complete reverse. Like,
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to say is, are these serendipitous proximity moments you're talking about, can they be modeled online and we just haven't seen them modeled yet in a way
I
that
think
works?
so. I do think they can.
Hmm.
But we may not have put time into it yet because we had such a simple,
Yeah.
easy in-person version of it that no one would invest in it otherwise.
Right. Right.
Like I do like the idea of products that help with serendipity for sure.
Right. And you mentioned like Call of Duty, and I think, like Fortnite is probably a common one where people come together around, nominally around a game, but it's also kind of more to hang out than necessarily to like win or like accomplish a mission in the game.
Totally. Like, they put their audio on, whether it's a Discord or just a lot of times my kids just throw their speakerphone and dial each other.
Hmm.
And and in fact, at one point, normally I had a rule you can't play games during school days, but when everyone went home, I realized there was no socialization. So I said, okay, new rule is you can play an hour or 2 hours, whatever I'd set it for, but you have to play with your friends. So you
Hmm.
can't just play
Right.
by yourself. You got to, that is your socialization. And
Right.
I'll be honest, like, I've been really impressed. These games like Fortnite and Minecraft and Call of Duty and all these, they coordinate, they work together, they
Yeah.
talk. Certainly they scream and shoot things too, but it's a form of teamwork that in many ways is very collaborative. It's
Right.
interesting.
It's almost like sports, what you
It
might
is
have
like
in
a
like
sports team. Yeah, yeah,
after school, get together and kick around a soccer ball or dribble a
yeah,
basketball
yeah.
and
With the only difference being that they can, barely lift their mouse after
right.
7
They like atrophy. They're gonna be like what's the movie, the Pixar one where all the humans are like
That's right.
in
That's right.
space and these
Wally,
like
Wally. Yeah.
Wally, right, right, right. They're
Yeah.
all
No,
like
it
on these
kind of
like
feels
lounge
like that when I
chairs.
go in and I look at the room and I see the potato chip bowl and all that stuff. I'm like, oh
Right.
no.
Awesome. All right. Well, I know we're running up against the hour we had planned. Any kind of final thoughts or other things you're thinking about these days?
No, I think that's it. I do, at some point I do want to replicate the dinner event feel again.
Yeah.
I've been, I doing some lunch clubs and different things
Hmm.
like that
Yeah.
and I do still think that, gosh, I miss that ability to meet people and
Yeah.
back to like tools. Zoom isn't really the tool for that. It's very hard
Right.
to have break off conversations and interactions. Even
Right.
this is an example, right? Like, we're here talking. This could have been, a start to start where we were up on stage talking, and yet
Yeah.
there are tables of people interacting with each other. So I
Yeah.
have been experimenting with, how do we make that happen again? So if I
Hmm.
crack that one, you may get an invite
Awesome.
to
So
an
you're
online
building
version.
a product for that right now.
I'm always, you know me, I'm always
Yeah.
tinkering. I've either built it or I've got a sketch of something out there.
Right. 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 Yeah.
So
I've
I've been
uh, I've I- I've participated in certainly Lunch Club. Run the World has done these kind of cocktail hour things, which are pretty cool. And then have you seen uh, what's it called? The There's one that's actually very focused on these breakout room kind of things
like the icebreaker
where they sort
stuff.
of start everything at the hub. Icebreaker.video. Yeah, have you played with that one?
I did a little bit.
Cool. So yeah, it feels
But
like
yeah, it's in those genres that I think, we could use,
yeah,
those experiences. So I think, um,
yeah,
I like all of the people going at it. I just think, part of it is I'm still, I remember the events I ran and I remember the kind of interactions, and I'm still working backwards from those, even though I know you can't replicate, you can't always copy the offline to online, but
right.
it's not so much that it's the socialization that happens that I want to see happen. And so it doesn't have to happen the same way, but I want to see these relationships like that you and I have, having been at events
Yeah,
repeatedly. And whenever people try to do it over like a Zoom type platform, it kind of falls short. So I think there's
yeah,
still an opening there for that, but I don't know.
totally.
It
Yeah,
may not be a business. It's just I think there's a need for a tool for it.
yep, yeah, I agree. Very cool.
So
All
yeah.
right. Well, I'd love to play when you have some to play with.
Well, all right. Good catching up.
Great. Good to hang. All right. See you, Leonard.